We wanted to go to Washington, D.C. because it allows us to explore the East Coast native aspect that we aren't seeing on our territories over here on the Coast Salish land. There's not a lot of East Coast representation, so it was interesting to know that some people who are East Coast natives were able to go to that side of the United States.
This is Hourglass, the podcast for United Way of King County in Seattle. Coming up, we will chat with Kayla Harstad of Urban Native Education Alliance, a Seattle-based organization that last week embarked on its annual trip to Washington, D.C. during Native American Heritage Month to learn more about the history of Indigenous people nationwide. United Way proudly supports Urban Native Education Alliance and how it spends its time engaging Indigenous people of all generations to empower its youth through education, culture, and tradition. We will also discuss United Way's Our Neighbor Fund and an upcoming volunteer opportunity. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for tuning in. According to World Population Review, Washington State has about 246,000 Indigenous people, the sixth most of any state in the U.S. behind California, Oklahoma, Texas, Arizona, and New York, respectively. According to Statista, the Seattle-Tacoma-Bellevue area has an Indigenous population of 2.9%, ranking it 17th on the list of America's metropolitan areas with the highest percentages of Indigenous people. Washington State and the Seattle area's concentration of Indigenous people means it's much easier to learn about local Indigenous history and culture here than it is in many other parts of the country. But students and staff at Urban Native Education Alliance, a Seattle-based organization that empowers young people through lessons on tradition and culture, have been eager to learn more about Indigenous history beyond our area. That is why each year, the organization, also known as UNEA, takes a group of interns to Washington, D.C. for a 5-day learning tour during November's National American Indian Heritage Month. The tour gives local youth an opportunity to experience Indigenous culture through some of America's largest repositories of recorded history. And it gives the youth a chance to tour non-Indigenous monuments and sites to learn more about people and events that have most impacted our nation's trajectory. The D.C. trip is scheduled for UNEA to join other Indigenous groups from across the country at the National Native Americans Memorial and Veterans Day weekend. The memorial, which opened in 2020, is adjacent to the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, which UNEA also tours. The group has also toured Arlington Cemetery in nearby Virginia and visited the gravesite of Marine Corps PFC Ira Hayes, an Indigenous soldier from Arizona who fought in World War II and was one of the 6 flag raisers in the iconic World War II photo taken atop Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima, a small Japanese island. They also visit book signing events for Indigenous authors and take part in lobbying activities. And then the group makes a few stops at non-Indigenous sites, including the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, the National Air and Space Museum, and the National Archives. For some of the interns, the cross-country trip is the first time they've flown. A few members of the group hail from tribes that are not in great numbers on the West Coast. For them, the tour has been a rare opportunity to connect with their culture and gain the types of learning experiences they would never get inside a classroom. The D.C. trip is among many offerings for youth at UNEA, which was founded in 2008 to engage all Indigenous generations to empower Native youth through education, culture, and tradition. Since its founding, the organization has launched programs that include a free course that allows students to explore their cultural identity through community-based learning, and a program that provides resources, educational activities, and cultural opportunities for urban Indigenous youth. UNEA is a member of the Indigenous Communities Fund, which United Way of King County launched in 2020 to provide Indigenous communities with resources to address COVID-19's impact. On the eve of UNEA's outbound trek from Seattle to D.C., we caught up with Kayla Harstad, UNEA's executive assistant, who has gone on the trip in each of the last 4 years. Here's what Kayla had to say about the experience. beginning with the group's annual wreath-laying ceremony at Arlington Cemetery to honor Indigenous soldiers for their service to our country.
So it usually consists of two soldiers who, when the clock strikes a certain time, I don't remember the exact time, they'll bring out the laying of the wreath from different organizations. So honestly, people all across the world can come and try and participate in this laying of the wreath ceremony by applying to it. Our students have to dress really nice, and then they'll lay the wreath down in front of the Arlington Cemetery, the top of the hill. And then, they will just participate. It's only like 5 to 10 minutes long, but it's super interesting. You have to be quiet. There's no talking allowed. Yeah.
Okay. And when did y'all start doing this? And how did it get started?
I think we started going probably 4 years ago now. This will probably be the 4th or 5th year. We got a grant, and we were able to use the grant for an educational field trip for us. And so we wanted to go to Washington, D.C. because it allows us to learn around the professionalism and leadership over there, as well just explore the East Coast Native aspect that we aren't seeing on our territories over here on the Coast Salish land. There's not a lot of East Coast representation. So it was interesting to know that some people who are East Coast natives were able to go to that side of the United States to learn more about their history, especially at the National Museum of American Indian. They have a lot of East Coast representation.
And so coming from the West Coast, being on the East Coast, what is the difference in terms of what you see in Indigenous culture?
Well, specifically, probably in Washington, D.C., it's, I wouldn't say it's minimal, but it's more of a professional setting, obviously, because it's the capital.
Right.
But it's definitely you have to navigate it yourself. You have to find activities and events going on yourself versus I feel like on the West Coast or especially just in Seattle, Washington, a lot of them are already going on regardless.
And how many times have you gone?
I've gone 4 times.
Wow. Tell me what it was like the first time you went.
It was really exciting. I'm interested in politics. I'm on the pre-law track. And so I definitely liked being in that environment of just seeing people with they have those goals already. They're already there. So it was really nice being in that type of representation and seeing just how professional as well as political it was over there and touring the Senate and touring the all these areas. It was really exciting. It was also a little nerve-wracking just because I haven't traveled that far in a long time, but it was really good. A really good learning experience.
And what was it like the last time you went?
It was post-pandemic.
Right.
And so it's definitely different. There were still a lot of restrictions for travel, but it was still good. It was also, we were able to go to the White House. It was a little interesting. It wasn't as much as I expected it to be. We did a lot of stuff. So our days are really packed from 9 a.m. until 9 or 10 p.m. at night. Last year, we met a group at the Native American Museum. It was also honoring Native American Veterans Day of lighting the fire at the museum. They were a group of elders, and we shared a song as well as we shared just introductions, and we shook hands with them, and then we were able to take photos. We talked for a while, and it was really exciting and interesting because we were just a young people and we were able to go up to these elders and talk to them and also just get an opportunity to honor who they are and what they've done for us. So it was nice.
So about how many people total actually go and what are their age ranges?
I would say it ranges from about 10 to 13 every year, depending on how big our youth council is. It's from 14 to 18. The youngest, I think, is 14 right now.
How many of them have never flown in a plane?
I think only 1 or 2, but last year was a lot more people who never flown in a plane.
What was that like?
Definitely nerve-wracking. I did not want to sit next to them. Yeah, but it was exciting. It was cute seeing how nervous they were.
Okay. I want you to think back to the first time and maybe all the other times, but is there anything about it where you said to yourself, prior to doing this, I had no idea about blank.
I think prior to doing a lot of the walking tours, I just did not have no idea about a lot of the history and education beforehand. I feel like in my history classes, we touched on a lot of subjects briefly and they weren't in depth. But because I went to DC, I was able to actually immerse myself in the experience with this representation.
And so what was it like going into the Museum of the American Indian?
It was really good. We spent all day there, to be honest, and it was just really exciting. I felt like I was constantly learning more and more information. There was representation from all Indigenous people.
And what other museums did you tour?
We toured the Art Museum. We toured the Science and Space Museum. We toured a lot of Smithsonian museums. We toured the African American Museum.
Oh, wow.
Something that stood out to me is when we were at the African American Museum of History and Culture, it was really just interesting to see how their museum was structured in terms of layout and history. So the bottom level would be about slavery and oppression and just the historical trauma. And then once you get up to the middle levels, it was more about Black excellence and modern day excellence from Black communities, which was really interesting. I felt like we could be there for hours and still not get around to the whole museum. And there was just a lot of female representation, which is what I really enjoyed seeing, especially. And
so lastly, when you come back, what do you tell people here about the experience?
We usually do a mandatory PowerPoint for all the youth to debrief our experience. And then we usually just share our cultural insights and our growth as a person, as well as growth as a group, what we learned together versus what we learned independently. And then we always have a community night where we share our presentations to our elders, our boards, our youth, just everybody.
Great. Thank you very much, Kayla Harstad and you, NEA. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe.
For more information about Urban Native Education Alliance, log on to urbannativeeducation.org. Our neighbors are doing their best to keep food on the table, but it's not been easy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, grocery prices rose to their biggest increase in 50 years. Most of the federal dollars that addressed the food crisis during the pandemic are gone, but grocery bills remain high. That's why United Way of King County has launched the Our Neighbor Fund to invest in strategies that will feed families in the coming year. Our Neighbor Fund will help expand our home grocery program to provide 5,000 families with free groceries each week. And it will help an additional 100 schools in King County implement the Breakfast After the Bell program, impacting 49,000 students. We're asking you to please make a gift to the Our Neighbor Fund so that we can serve more of our neighbors. For more information or to make a donation, log on to uwkc.org/donate. Join us for the Holiday Exchange with Community Passageways on December 7th from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. at 306 23rd Avenue South, Suite 101 in Seattle. Here's a chance to roll up your sleeve and take action against homelessness, hunger, and poverty. You can help United Way grantee Community Passageways assist their neighbors with all-day festivities, including painting and games. For more information, log on to uwkc.org/events. At United Way of King County, we are working side by side with communities to build an equitable future for everyone. Hourglass United Way is a podcast that highlights how we and our partners spend time making a difference in our communities. Our work is made possible by the generous donations from people like you. Please send comments and suggestions about our podcast to hourglassunitedway@gmail.com. To learn more about our work or to support United Way, log on to uwkc.org. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for listening. Until next time.